Hello, everyone, for joining us. For an informal talk. So I think we have 3 questions that we need to answer. So we'll ask ourselves and answer it. The first thing I want to basically comment from your perspective, I think coming from pharmacy, is what could be the parameter and metrics, especially with your presentation, you mentioned a lot of dimensions.
Last time I'm going to stand up because I just want to show this point. Like, look, if you talk about smart cities, if I'm going to ask you, what's a smart city?
Interconnected city.
Okay.
That's all the data before. You can harness all of the data to bring up to certain one or
yeah. So exactly. So interconnection. What's a smart city? I'm going to keep on asking this question until I get a few different answers. Yeah.
It's a city that uses ICT technology for improving the reliable issues of facilities and
yeah. Okay. So here I hear ICT, I hear smartness, I hear like happiness. So what I just want to show with this is that look, there is no definition of a smart city. And that makes it really hard to answer this question, because if you're going to ask me how to measure a smart city, if there's no real definition for it, it's really hard to do so. Because, like, look, if you look at ICT, that means that if you have the 100 smart cities that India launched, for example, that means if you're just going to look at ICT, that means it's going to be very hard for them to compete with established cities as Dubai or other cities. That means, like, I think like a smart city means for every city different. Because like for India, it's going to be much more the basic infrastructure that's needed to be able to talk about smart city. Meanwhile, if we're talking in other countries, like for example in Barcelona or so on, then a smart city is probably going to be more with technology and so on. And then for the last one, if you then look at the UAE or in Dubai, then it's going to be happiness. Is happiness a good parameter for a smart city? Does it mean if every citizen in a city is going to be happy that the city is going to be smart, or the other way around? So I think it's a very hard one to answer.
I think I want to reflect more from where I'm coming from. I'm an urbanist in a smart city conference. So for us in urban planning, it's all about the human dimension of cities. And the more we can humanize the parameters and the indicators of any urban or citywide urban plan or urban strategy, it's going to be more closer impacting the people. Because one of the aspects, for example, when we put indicator and parameters of smart city is that we take a top-down approach. So basically, we assume the needs of the citizen, and we assume what happiness means for the inhabitants. But placemaking, if people know the word, it's about community participatory approach. So how we can bring the community into that aspect of putting indicators. I worked in Abu Dhabi municipality for 3 years as an advisor for urban planning. And one of the things we've done as part of the Abu Dhabi 2030 plan is we did majlis in neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, where tribes, so we actually went to the tribe and we put them in the majlis and we asked them, what would you like Abu Dhabi 2030 to be with for you? So in a way, we aligned the urban planning process with the cultural context. So this is my own thing. It doesn't matter what is the parameter, it's about how did you put it. Is there a participatory approach that was implemented for this parameter to be owned also by the citizens? Because one of the major issues that we have in any smart city thing is ownership. How can the community own it? Because once you own it, it's a totally different ballgame. For example, Bristol this year took over London as the smartest UK city. This is, I think, Hawaii partners in this conference. They did an index for the UK smart cities. And one of the major factors in Bristol taking over London is that its inhabitants owned the plans. It owned the plan, basically. There was a lot of SMEs who were part of this smart city approach. So, for example, I'll give you an example of what we're doing in placemaking. We are now launching what we call placemaking workshops for kids. I mean, you know, kids, they do have a say because most of them, they are interacting with the IoT infrastructure. Whether we like it or not, our kids are interfacing with technology. So how can a kid go to Dubai Pulse and actually use it in their science project? How do they do that? We're now working with schools on placemaking workshops to use that in order for kids also to be part of that. We're talking also about SMEs. We're working also with some of Dubai entities to launch placemaking workshops for communities. As you know, Dubai has been planned as districts, urban districts. And each urban district has its own community. So Dubai Media City has its own community, Dubai Internet City own community, Business Bay own community. So how can you leverage community knowledge? That's a big question in Dubai. We are not leveraging enough the community knowledge that is really needed. So I think we answered the first.
Actually, I have a question for that one for you then. Could you give me an example of these ideas that actually comes from this community platform?
It's not a platform. It's more it's a brainstorming, creative thinking, social innovation kind of event. But mainly, for example, one of the workshops we've done, we got some ideas on how parks can be adopted for new technology. Because we tend to think that when we talk about smart city, it's always about urban space. Whether you like it or not, urban planners and urban designers are a big components of any smart city infrastructure. Actually, most of the case studies analyzing Barcelona, since you've mentioned it, is that the mayor of Barcelona did an urban design commission that was aligned with the Smart City Commission and the Infrastructure Commission. And he used a matrix organization instead of using a top-down approach. And why? Because your sensors, your infrastructure, where maybe it's a boring part, but for us, it's everything. Because where are you going to put them? You're going to put them in an urban space. What are you measuring? You're measuring interaction. Unless people interact, there will be nothing to measure. So urban space is always a major component of any smart city infrastructure. And urban planning is going to play more and more role because unless we plan these districts to enable life, there's nothing to measure. What are you going to measure? Buildings? Without life, there will be no smart city.
To take it to the next question that was...
Yeah, I think the next session will, how are objectives and KPIs set and who are the stakeholders involved in this? What do you think are the stakeholders?
No, like let's take again one step back. Now, we all have a smartphone here. If you would just Google like smart city index or city index or anything that that relate to it, how many different indexes that we're gonna get? It's like many. Like we have for example, the innovative city index of.
Tons of.
Yeah, exactly. So at the end, it's very hard to say which are the right measurements to do so. Also, like it's also some of the things are very hard to measure. So that means like if you want to do this, that means we need quantitative data to actually to compare. Because like otherwise you're just going to say, does this city has it? Yes or no? Yes or no question, really not going to be able to actually identify what's how smart the city is compared to other ones. So I think it's very hard to measure it. But then if you see like on the partners, I think like this Dubai Pulse project is a really good partner, no? Because they're going to give, or the government itself giving the data available for any citizen to work with or any company to work with. Because if I understand correctly, that means as well, like if you want to start transport company or something similar, you can actually go to this data actually to see, okay, if I do this, where should I start? Should I start in Marina or should I start downtown, or which area is the best to start with? So I think like for partners, for sure, it's going to be government's going to play a major role. It's coming from the private sector, but the government still needs to guide it, to guide, because also there's also a security issue with this data. So there has to be like some institution that stands above the private sector that actually can control which data is available for citizens and which is not available.
I mean, for me, also coming from a placemaking background or a community perspective, the question is how are objectives set? We tend to forget that when we talk about cities, we are talking about neighborhoods and districts. There's nothing called city in terms of geography or human geography. A city is formed by districts and by neighborhoods. And therefore, one of the comments I have on the Dubai Pulse is that they adopted Dubai Municipality District, which is not actually a reflection of the current neighborhood and district mental maps of the city. So in urban planning, we do have what we call social boundaries of neighborhood and district, cultural boundaries, technological boundaries. So the Dubai Municipality one is more infrastructure-led. It tends to avoid the cultural and the other questions. So how do they set? I mean, it's obvious for me through community participatory process. And it's not rocket science. We have crowdsourcing now. It's a known tool for gathering impact on that. Helsinki, they've done Pro Helsinki 2.0. It's an urban plan generated exclusively by the community living in the city. Especially when you're talking about a city with more than 120 nationalities. You cannot anymore ignore the importance of competing against other cities to attract these migrants. Now, who are the stakeholders involved in this? I mean, in a district, for me, the local population is as important as anybody else. So who lives in Motor City? And if these people living in Motor City, what type of smart development they want to see in their own neighborhoods? And I think this is a very big question for us, to own the urban space, but also to own the process of the smart city. So the community needs to be a major stakeholder. Now, I have another comment. And that comment actually is coming from the private sector. You work with the federal level with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I think you see it. In diplomacy, maybe UAE is much more advanced than multinational companies, in a way, in terms of its soft power. We see the same when we talk about any government initiative in the UAE. The government is much more advanced, and the private sector is trying to catch up. That catching up, so far, is not working. I'll tell you why it's not working. Because when the government is answering national goals of public good, the private sector has to answer profitability targets from their headquarters. And therefore, unless we involve the private sector and make them believe from their headquarters that this is a feasible solution, we'll always play catch up with the private sector. And that's a big problem when you talk about smart. Because most of the city who decided to go on themselves and take the burden of doing smart city infrastructure, they have lost money and big amounts of money. Unless you involve the private sector in financing, in benefiting commercially from smart city infrastructure, it will not be sustainable, neither on the midterm nor on the long term. And that's where I'm coming from. As an advisor, I always advise my clients, public, private, partnerships that are not built on consensus, they are not built on incentives, they are building on sharing risks, financial risks. And that's the real word that we usually avoid in smart city infrastructure. The funding is not cheap, and unless you do it through the private sector, the city, on the long term, will not be able to sustain its own target. And there are so many case studies of cities like this. Barcelona, it hit a deadlock. Helsinki hitting a deadlock. Oslo is hitting a deadlock. Amsterdam itself, the hub of smart city, wannabes, is also hitting a deadlock. Now, we have a solution. What's the solution? It's very obvious. Europe. They've done it so much. European Network of Urban Living Labs. You mentioned it, and I'm completely with it. An urban living lab where it provides cost-effective tools for proof of concept. This is what we need if you want to take this further. We need urban living labs completely co-shared in terms of financial risks between the private sector and the public sector. The policy tools are available. It worked in Europe. It can work here. And Dubai can be, the hub for that. So that's the answer for the second question. Now, third question, and the last. Is it possible to build an evaluating model?
For evaluating, for that one, actually going to go back to the multilateral forums that I talked about before. guess like on these forums itself, so what they do, they exchange expertise and so on, but it's also the best way to actually to evaluate if the projects are working. So that means that on these forums itself, what they do, they can exchange the ideas that worked in their city and then to see implemented in another city as well. So I think to have a model that's going to work for every city, that's impossible. But to exchange expertise, that's the best way to take cities to the next level.
I do. I mean, I'm completely aligned with you, is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And for Dubai Pulse, I think there is another city that's doing, Vancouver is doing Vancouver Pulse, and there are Portland who's doing Portland Pulse. So many cities are, trying to get the pulse of their cities. But we all know that it's not, the word evaluation, I think also in diplomacy is the same thing. It's a big word for us in urban planning. Why are we evaluating and what are we evaluating? So the why is, as you know, raised a lot of concerns regarding why we are doing it. Are we doing it to improve the lives through decision making, or are we just doing it to show a nice dashboard? So the why is so important, because unless this informs tangible decisions, people will not trust anymore the process. So there is this aspect of input into decision making that is so important. I think with the current public policy, there is so many advancements in public policy in the UAE. One of them is the public policy guide that is recently launched by the Executive Council. And the public policy guide, there is a whole section on quantitative analysis of public policy. So I can see already how it can help. Let me talk about urban planning. In urban planning, we do have evaluation models. As you know, UN Habitat has its own prosperity index. And we have also World Bank. They have their own World Bank cities, now resilience index. Rockefeller Institute Foundation has resilience index. So there are so many indices on the urban planning field that we can adopt for cities. The problem is there is no yet indices on a district level. And that is the real gap that we have. Why? Because as you know, and as I told you before, people connect with the city on a district level. They don't connect with the city on a city level. So if you ask, it's too big for the human brain to actually extract meaning from a metropolitan map. We are doing it now because we are using Google Map. But our brain is not geared yet to connect to a city on a metropolitan map. So we need to really think how we can do an evaluation model on a district level, not on a city level, because then we are managing the city from the wrong scale. And that's my biggest worry so far in all the indices that we're doing.
Yeah, so to finalize this one, I think then a government should be like a regulator, a facilitator, and a motivator. So regulating to make sure that with the data, that what can be done and so on. Facilitator by you saying like for the city itself, for the private sector to actually to help them start up. This can be by funding and so on. And then the motivator for the citizen itself to actually to use the smart city applications that are out there.
Also, with local, as you said, I totally agree with you. Local councils, the city councils are becoming so important because of all the work that a lot of sociologists are doing, saying that cities are no more only part of the national framework, they can operate on their own. And that's, I think, one of the biggest learning from Dubai as a success story. We want to leave it to the floor, so please, if you have any questions, anything you would like to clarify with us. Yes.
Thank you very much. Actually, that discussion was very, very useful, surprisingly. Didn't have high expectations. Surprised me. Quickly, one of the points you made in social boundaries. So, we have a lot of data. We are not subject matter expert in all areas. And one of the things we struggle with is, how do I represent this data that it's useful? One of the questions I had for you is, how do you represent these social boundaries or the community boundaries?
Well, there are so many urban thinkers who worked on this, but there is also so many new applications on that work. So in London, for example, they triangulated who is calling who. So that triangulation, in terms of density, can show you the boundaries of the residential, especially if you triangulate after 5 p.m., so after people coming back from their homes. That's the main, because you want to connect with the local population, you want to connect with the resident people, not because the problem also in Dubai is, as you know, we don't live where we work. Okay, so you will have two roles to play in any city development, saying what you want and where you work, and saying what you want and where you work. So improving the way you work and improving the way you live. And also you have the leisure time. So you can do that through triangulation. I can get you the case study if you want. It's done in London, actually, and they actually did I wrote a blog about it. They actually compared the social neighborhoods with official municipal neighborhoods, and they didn't match at all. So that was a very big eye-opener.
One of the things which we have done recently is we have generated a dashboard called People Flow.
Oh.
So we took the call profiles of our subscribers at different times of day, exactly like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And then we kind of mapped out the travel profile in Dubai across a day or a week.
Yeah.
And so on. How does this help urban planners? Like this type of data, how would it help you in your urban planning?
I mean, I'm going to talk about later in my session about how you plan smart sustainable district. And as you know, okay, I come from a futurist perspective. I think the only currency that we're going to have in the future is time. Everything else will disappear. We are selling time and buying time. Okay, so, and time is going to have different value for different people. So travel usually analysis help us understand the cost of productivity to the government. For example, if I have an employee living in Sharjah and commuting every day for 4 hours, I'm losing 4 hours of the urban economy. A city, urban economy is the sum of the productivity of its individual. So if I have 1.1 million people moving to Sharjah every day for 4 hours, I'm losing 4.4 million hours. If I take the average rate, hourly rate of any person, 50 dirham, which is, as you know, is ridiculous. I mean, calculate how much I'm losing as a city every day from the productivity of my people. The question is, are they spending this money in Sharjah? Okay, so if you see on a federal level, this is a loss case. On a city level, it's a loss case. So what am I going to do? And this is where urban planning comes in. How can I provide affordable housing in a way that breaks the commute? How can I build public spaces in a way that breaks the commute? What are the programs that I can insert in this travel journey in order for the city to increase? So prosperity and livability, they go hand in hand. And unless this becomes a goal for the smart city analysis, we are just doing paralysis analysis.
I think that's exactly the objective that we would like to achieve by building a platform and then gathering the data. That's exactly the type of actionable insights we would like to generate. And probably we need like help of people in the specific industries who are the subject matter experts, like you're representing the urban planning domain, and then also healthcare. And so we probably need to engage with these different domains.
Call them communities of practice in human geography or in geography or even multinational companies. They establish what we call communities of practice, COP, communities of practice. It has a in UK, I worked with a company where we had like 100 communities of practice, and they are all virtual groups, and you can jolt any question to any of the group. Like, for example, I'm working on a project and it has a water canal, and I need a water canal expert. I go to the community of practice of water infrastructure and bridges, and I just get the question, and you know there are 6 people who can answer me around the world. That's very important.
Oh, that's very good. I think this is something probably in your field you would have done on a normal way, but for us would probably be a new thing that we need to engage. to make our work more useful. The other sorry, I'm going to monopolize the mic unless someone has questions. The other question I had was when you guys were discussing about indexing and scoring smart cities and performance of smart cities. I just wanted to make one point. I don't know what you think about it. Is most of so even self-evaluation. So we as we are continuously evaluating ourselves against other smart city programs that are sponsored around the world. So there are around roughly 140 serious smart city programs that are happening around the world. So we continuously compare ourselves to them and see where we stand internally, just to judge ourselves. And one of the things we realize in our area is that it's really going to be consensus-based approach initially. There is no pragmatic, objective way of measuring success with regards to smart city, only because of the vast amount of variables you'd have to crunch to get to an objective answer. It would be more subjectivity and consensus-based approach to how well you're performing. I don't know what you would think of that kind of observation.
I think what would be very interesting is that you could actually take all the different indexes together and then take an average. Because, like, look, if you take an index that's made by Copenhagen, Copenhagen is going to be one of the first. If you look at the different indexes that exist, then Dubai is going to vary from number 1 to number 50, 60 of smart cities. So that means, like, I think it would be better to actually to take an average. But to come back on the point that you made before about time, what I actually want to ask the two IoT experts that we have here today is there any data available how much time you gain by IoT on a daily basis? By implementing IoT? Is there, like, let's say you gain 20 minutes a day? Is there something that actually says by using IoT, that means that you gain some time average on each day? Is there something available?
For us, in general, it's our business to collect telemetry data. We've been doing that on our core for a very long time. So that's day-to-day business for us in order to gather remote monitoring and telemetry data. So the adoption of sensors, sensor technology as well for us. So what we did is one of the problems we had, it's a very silly issue, right? But one of the problems we had was monitoring the fuel levels of remote cell towers. So towers that are in a remote location, which don't have DEWA facilities available, we would have to run through generators. These generators have massive fuel tanks, and say we have 1,000 of these cell towers spread across the UAE geography in remote places to cover remote areas. One of the issues we had was the fuel levels need to be monitored so that we can go and refill these areas. And you can imagine the logistics around that and the cost that would have to bear to maintain these areas. Some of them are in very remote places. I have to tell you, in the mountains or near Jabal Jais or those type of places. What IoT helped us do is implement a sensor network that helped us improve the logistics massively. And the number of not only saved man hours, but also the investment, the benefit that we got from our ROI, it's immense, really uncomparable. So those type of benefits. In fact, there were cases where we had theft of the fuel, these remote areas, where people would find these locations remote enough, and then they would just steal the fuel, right? And we would not have known that unless we monitor all of these areas remotely using IoT.
I think your point is very relevant. Since time is going to be currency of the future, maybe one of its benefits is to calculate how much we're saving time. Because if I'm using IoT and I can expand my limited 24 hours to like 28 hours, I mean, the 4 hours for a CEO is definitely something that on a leadership level, it might yeah, it's a big benefit that justify the investment
Yeah.
in IoT.
For us, it's really a leap of faith to use time as a source of measure and efficiency. I'm sure it's done at higher levels, and in terms of man hours saved and so on and so forth. But it's such a differentiated experience once you have this, that we're seeing benefits across the board, so tangible that, you know, time is really, although at a higher level it makes a very good comparative metric, we see a very clear benefit across the board.
Okay, any other question? Okay, yes.
Sorry, my name is Osama Fakhuri from Abaya. You know, Dubai is not like one city, is several cities within, as we all know, and how it grew. My question to you, and maybe from your discussion with several maybe entities from urban, are you advising in order to have a certain technology for any small district? We know about Dubai's house is a huge project, so the technology is key. But what about like small ones like Milan area or similar to Motor City, which is a small district? I'm not sure if I'm using the right terms in urban terms. So is anybody putting like minimum in order to have IoT, minimum to have in order to reach the vision of Dubai to be the smartest city?
No, I have to be very frank with you. There is, Dubai Smart City has invested on smart district guidelines. So if you go to their website, you will see smart district guidelines. These are guidelines for developers if they want to build a district, how they can apply smart city. But I am not seeing the initiatives on the district level that I'm describing in this conference. I think this angle has been missed from the discussion. Thank you very much.